Hi, it's Dave, and I'm back with another little mini feature for you for Empire 40. Those of you who are regulars to Farthest From may have caught the panel that I did back in December on how Star Wars has influenced the video game industry. And within this, there was like a little look at some of the things that weren't necessarily above board, but quite clearly Star Wars influenced and based in a lot of these like video game titles. Today, I'm going to look at the ones that are specifically Empire Strikes Back related. Now, for those of you who have no idea that what I'm talking about, in the early 80s, the video game industry was a whole new sector, and it was very, very much an emerging market, and it was almost a bit of a wild west in terms of entertainment. In some cases, people would do very much similar games based around concepts of other games or clone them as they became known as, or in other cases taking bits of artwork and inserting them to kind of make their whole video game premise look a little bit cooler than it perhaps actually was. Star Wars had a big influence on many of these, and what we're going to look today is some of the games that were influenced by The Empire Strikes Back, but I don't think you'd really get away with this under today's kind of climate. If I start off with The Empire Fights Back, this was for the Spectrum, which was a popular home computer platform in the UK that spawned many games, all on tape. But we're starting off with The Empire Fights Back, but it wasn't just in terms of titles. You've also got the Sphere of Destiny. Now, this is quite clearly borrowing that classic Empire Strikes Back logo there. So it wasn't necessarily always the things that you'd see that were images or characters. They were quite sometimes using titles and trademarks and copyrights as well. However, for whatever reason, when it comes to Empire Strikes Back, the most popular thing to be used on video games, for whatever reason, is the Snowspeeder. And it appeared everywhere. Commodore 64, Star Post. You can quite clearly see, more visible here in the foreground, is an X-Wing or an adaptation of the X-Wing. But flying towards the ship at the rear, a whole bunch of Snowspeeders. Snowspeeder was an iconic vehicle, but it just kept appearing again and again and again, particularly for the Ham-in-X or Leisure Vision, depending on where you were in the world. Star Chess, TIE Fighter, Snowspeeder, duking it out on a chessboard. Of course it is. It's effectively a video game all about chess, but to make it look a little bit more exciting, they're using a lot of Star Wars graphics in on their video games. And that's just the start. Red Clash saw Star Destroyers, TIE Fighters, and also a Snowspeeder, and Space Attack as well. Not only featured the Snowspeeder, but also the Millennium Falcon as well. However, more mainstream than that, you also found Snowspeeders in Atari's Asteroids. You could argue that that is based around a Star Destroyer if you look at the engines, but the rear of this, the engine configuration and design there, is that of the Macquarie Snowspeeder concepts. This was also found in Vanguard as well, with a very similar Macquarie-esque engine detail on the back of the ship there. It wasn't the only titles. You had on the BBC Eagle Empire, which featured this same Macquarie-esque Snowspeeder detail there. It's quite incredible the number of times that this has cropped up. And then lastly, SKRAMBLE for the VIC-20. Again, it's another version of the Macquarie Snowspeeder. And when you look at this, maybe it's because it wasn't necessarily the final production model or artwork that was used in this that they thought they could get away with it, but it's clearly influencing video game after video game. However, it wasn't just Snowspeeders. In some cases, it was very, very blatant in terms of its use. GALAXIA, again on the VIC-20. is a slight reworking of a classic publicity shot of Luke's X-Wing heading towards like Dagobah there. And it wasn't just the only like publicity still. Thunderstruck 2, the MINDMASTER for the BBC. Now this might not be as obvious when you like look at it, but if you look at the little chap down here in the corner, that is literally based on Luke on Dagobah, and that classic shot with the X-Wing behind him sinking in the swamp and he's got his gun drawn as he's like looking out. By that same logic, I'm also calling out Missile Command on the Atari. This is a classic game, but I am saying that the lady in the background here is based on Leia Bespin. Same kind of haircut, and even the guy at the controls, that does look roughly like an X-Wing helmet, where it's got the pronounced ridge on the helmet with like the coloured bit at the front that you'd find on like Luke's X-Wing helmet. It's a little bit coincidental, don't you think? However, some more obscure things would creep into some of the video games. And again, we go back to the VIC-20 and CYCLONS. It's not quite clear unless you like look carefully, but you've got a Rebel transporter here. Now, when would the Rebel transport ever feature on the cover of a video game? It's quite incredible when you think about it. You know, anything was up for grabs if you were brave enough to like give it a go. However, we go back to the Leisure Vision and the Ham&X and Space Pirates. On the cover, it's not that obvious of a Star Wars reference, even though we've seen plenty of Snowspeeders and Star Destroyers and Millennium Falcons on their other games. But it's not until you have a look inside at the cartridge that you can see a TIE bomber. Empire Strikes Back wouldn't be Empire Strikes Back without everyone's favourite bounty hunter, and he got featured in a bunch of video games as well. Some of them from quite obvious to some of them a little bit subtle. But if you look at Sentinel, that was on the BBC, you got Slave 1 right there in the middle, and it's quite a nice little illustration there. It's like a technical drawing of it. But Slave 1 also featured, again in another Atari game, on MICROSURGEON. Now this isn't that obvious either, but this little ship that is flying into the body like in a space star is actually a kit-bashed Slave 1 model. And if you look at these images here, you can see some closer ups of the kit bash as they were doing this photography to create this cover art. Boba Fett also was featured or influenced Zub, where he, you won't zub me this time, you zubs. But you've got the Boba Fett helmet there and a few sort of like homages to his armor. A little bit comical in terms of his presentation on there, but that is 100% Boba Fett. And then equally, in an effort to make spelling interesting and fun, you have Word Wizard, which is very much similar to the Palatoy Bounty Hunter logo there, but you've got the Boba Fett helmet. Again, I'm calling out and I'm saying that that was based loosely around Boba Fett. Now those are some of the games that we've discussed that are just purely influenced by The Empire Strikes Back. However, there are a few other additions as well. If you haven't already, I thoroughly recommend getting the Art of Atari book. It was a Kickstarter book that was created a few years ago, and it is brilliant. It looks specifically at Atari games and arcades. And for Phoenix, you've got this rather stunning piece of unused artwork that was abandoned, but effectively were AT-ATs upside down with the heads with wings, and you've still got the AT-AT legs as like the feet of the Phoenix used. Get that book. There's plenty of other Star Wars references in there. Remember, we're only talking about The Empire Strikes Back here. There are lots and lots of Star Wars references and Return of the Jedi. And maybe that's for another panel for another time. However, it wasn't just located to home entertainment. It was at the arcades as well. And there was a whole heap of arcade games that were influenced by The Empire Strikes Back. Victory by Eddy not only featured snowspeeders on like the side of the cabinet, but you also had probe droids as well. In addition, you had SPECTAR, also by Eddy, which would feature the head cockpit of an AT-AT on its cabinet graphics, which is really quite cool, and also on the operator's manual as well. And lastly, Time Pilot 84, which would feature the snowspeeder again, which for whatever reason, the snowspeeder by far is the most popular vehicle to influence video games and arcades from The Empire Strikes Back. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you are interested in learning more, like I said, there are an awful lot more other titles that were Star Wars influence and also Return of the Jedi. This has just been The Empire Strikes Back that we've been looking specifically at. But it's been quite fascinating. If you want to know more, follow the Farthest From Facebook page. There are a few slides up from the December show's panel that we did on there. Or drop us a line. I'm happy to talk about these because I find this stuff fascinating. I mean, it's incredible. We kind of know it's there, but nobody actually has really ever talked about this. But there's a heck of a lot of reference material there, and it's really cool to see this now in this day and age, which they would never, ever, ever, ever get away with. Anyway, that's me for Empire 40. Enjoy! What the hell?